Hello and welcome back to Cindy's Library, where today we are going to do some Tolkien talk, specifically about what is probably my favorite short story by J.R.R. Tolkien, Leaf by Niggle. This is truly a gem. Interestingly enough, it's probably what one could consider allegorical, in spite of the fact that in the edition or the preface to the second edition of The Lord of the Rings, which has been included ever since, that Tolkien cordially dislikes allegory. But even so, Leaf by Niggle is amazing. You start out with this. There once was a little man called Niggle who had a long journey to make. He did not want to go. Indeed, the whole idea was distasteful to him, but he could not get out of it. He knew he would have to start sometime, but he did not hurry with his preparations. And then it goes on into how Niggle is a painter, and that's what he basically lives for. In spite of the fact that he lives in a rather strict society where he has his obligations to fulfill, especially his next door neighbor Parrish, who is lame and always seems to be needing something, if not for him, for his wife. But the painting, he was the sort of painter who can paint leaves better than trees. And what a tree he made, and what leaves he made. There's one picture in particular which bothered him. It had begun with a leaf caught in the wind, and it became a tree, and the tree grew, sending out innumerable branches, and thrusting out the most fantastic fruits. Strange birds came and settled on the twigs and had to be attended to. Then all around the tree and behind it, through the gaps in the leaves and boughs, a country began to open out, and there were glimpses of a forest marching over the land, and mountains tipped with snow. Niggle lost interest in his other pictures, or else he took them and tacked them onto the edges of his great picture. And so it goes. The tree at any rate was curious, quite unique in its way. So was Niggle, but he was also a very ordinary and rather silly little man. So time passes on. Niggle realizes that the time for his journey is in fact coming, whether he likes it or not. He doesn't have that much longer. And of course, just when he is ready to finish the picture as much as it can be finished, disaster strikes. Parrish needs his help, even though Niggle isn't quite entirely sure how much, shall we say, urgency Parrish's situation really requires. And then the inspector shows up and is not pleased with Niggle's lack of help to Parrish. He should have used the canvas he was using for his painting to cover Parrish's roof. And before Niggle can really do or say anything in response, it is time to leave. And Niggle is forced out the door with only a small bag he happened to have put together, and he even loses that on the train. As the driver says, when Niggle protests that his painting's not yet finished, "Not finished," said the driver. "Well, it's finished with as far as you're concerned, at any rate." And immediately when Niggle gets to his destination, he realizes he left his one little bag on the train, and before he can go and get it, it is off. And so, because he has nothing, he is put in the workhouse, where he is miserable. But he does learn something about being practical and about time management. And then one day there are two voices, one more stern, one more compassionate sounding, shall we say. And after debating Niggle's merits and demerits, the second voice finally decides Niggle should be given gentle treatment. And so he is taken to a new country or a new place. And when he walks out, what does he say? That he sees his tree as he imagined it. Before him stood the tree, his tree finished, if you could say that of a tree that was alive, its leaves opening, its branches growing and bending in the wind, that Niggle had so often felt or guessed, and had so often failed to catch. He gazed at the tree slowly, lifted his arms, and opened them wide. It is a gift, he said. He was referring to his art and also to the result, but he was using the word quite literally. Showing the importance in the end of art, no matter how necessary and important practical matters may be. There's a place for art too. Just because the tree itself is finished doesn't mean what is around it is not. So Niggle works on that, and eventually Parrish himself comes to work and help. Interestingly enough, Parrish, the one who was more of a stickler for work, spends more time idling as he tells Niggle what is needed, since he is a gardener and knows Niggle's the one working, although he is the one who has the vision of what it should be, but he doesn't know it is, or rather, he doesn't know how it should be accomplished. And finally, the two neighbors, they make a harmonious whole, working together. And there's more I could say about the story, but I will leave you to discover those gems that remain still in it for yourself. But what is interesting is this is, if anything, an allegory of Tolkien's life. The journey that Niggle knew he was supposed to go on eventually is death, and the workhouse is purgatory, where all of Niggle's faults are mended, and his art can be completed later in the further country, which is Niggle's parish, which is adorable the way that it uses both of their names. But Tolkien said that this story came to him basically in one burst, and he got it down basically in one burst, which is rather unusual for him to write an allegory. But what is clear is it is also a reflection of his own fears at the time. It was, what was it? It looks like it was written around 1940. And he had been working on the Silmarillion for decades by that point, which had been refused. The Hobbit had been well received. The publisher wanted a new Hobbit, and so he had started Lord of the Rings, although he didn't know it was the Lord of the Rings quite yet, I think. He still thought of it as a new Hobbit. But the more he worked on it, the more massive it became. And between World War II, changes at Oxford University, where he was working due to the war and having to help with citizen patrols and things like that, and taking on extra duties so others could go help the war effort in other ways, and administrative duties, and who knows what else. And there may have even been some family worries at the time. Seemed like to him that he would never get anything done. The times where he could actually work on what was nearest to his heart were few and far between. And so, yeah, he did subconsciously worry that it would all be for naught and be unfinished. Fortunately, of course, we know that ended up not being true, and we were gifted with The Lord of the Rings, which was enough for the rest of the Legendarian to be published eventually. It took many more years for all of that to be done, but it was done. It is interesting that Leaf by Niggle shows both the importance of doing your duty and of keeping on top of practical concerns and of artistic efforts. Niggle's Parish ends up being a rather useful retreat for certain kinds of cases, according to the second voice. So, art is not useless, and I like that. It is also interesting that there's basically two endings for Leaf by Niggle. Not that there's two choices of endings or that one was written and the other not. They're both included and both make sense. I have to see what you think about both endings. I prefer the one in the other country personally. The one in the real world is a little bit too depressing and on the nose, but if you like Tolkien but haven't read Leaf by Niggle yet, I can definitely suggest it. If you give it a try or if you've read it before, I'd love to hear what you think about it. And feel free to leave comments and suggestions. Until next time, this is Cindy from Cindy's Library. I hope we all stay safe and healthy and happy reading.